Welcome to the Yahuwah Triangle Virtual Conference, hosted by Skiba. Coming up next, Part 1, The Great Pyramid. Now, here's your host, Skiba.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Yahuwah Triangle Virtual Conference. I am your host, Skiba, and a big shout out to my friend Rick Hummer, who put together that intro for us. It's sort of a last-minute thing, but he did an awesome job. So I just want to give a big round of applause for Rick Hummer. Thank you so much for that awesome introduction. All right. Hopefully you guys had a chance to watch the welcome video that I put together. Sorry, my brain is like a little bit slow today. I got all of about 20 minutes of sleep last night. So I'm not responsible for my actions today, but I'm still excited. I'm as awake as I can be right now. So I would certainly appreciate your prayers getting through today. It's going to be a long day, but it's going to be a fun day. I'm really excited about being able to do this today. So tell you what, let's just go ahead and get right into it. Well, let me do a screen share just real quick in case you missed the welcome video. And let's see, I'll do screen one. And okay, just real quick, for each presentation at the appropriate time, you guys are already here, so I assume you guys already clicked on that one. You're gonna click on that red button at the appropriate time to watch the presentation. You guys really should take advantage of all the extra stuff that I've put on each of these. These are the links for the one that I'm gonna be doing right now on the Great Pyramid, so you can click on those to read a lot more, and of course watch this full video here by Patrick Heron. And the same is true for all of them. I've got various resources and stuff for you to check out. If you have questions specifically related to the topic that I'm talking about, use the black chat box for that particular presentation. So this is the one we're doing right now. Put any questions you may have right here, because I will not be able to monitor the chat room that you guys are using right now in the Google Hangout. So, all right, so just be sure to ask your questions there if you have any. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the screen share. It was like infinity, man, infinity and beyond. We're going there. All right, let's see. Let me get my PowerPoint up here, and we will jump right in. Just give me a second here. I really need to have 3 monitors to do this sort of thing. All right. And screen share, and you should hopefully be seeing the welcome screen right now. All right, welcome to the Yahuwah Triangle, a Great Pyramid, Babylon, and the Commandments of Eden. This is part 1. It is called the Great Pyramid of Giza. Now, of course, I'm sure many of you are already familiar with some of my work, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But just by way of sort of an introduction, my name is Skiba. I am a born-again believer in Yeshua, and I'm 45 years old in the flesh. I'm about 38 years old in Christ, but I'm only about 5 years or so in the understanding of the Torah, specifically as it pertains to keeping the Sabbath and the feasts and the 10 Commandments and stuff like that, not out of any legalistic obligation. I know that I am saved by grace through faith, and that it is the gift of God. It's not of works. I understand that fully, and I understand that we obey the commandments as per 1 John 2 through 5, simply out of love for our Creator. And there are a lot of benefits for doing so. It's actually a good thing. Go figure. Imagine that. Obeying God could lead to benefits. I am a filmmaker by trade and a researcher and author by hobby, although it seems like lately researching and writing has taken up a lot more of my time, so it's almost like that has become my trade. But I'm just basically laying the nonfiction foundation for the science fiction of a TV series that I've been developing for the last 4 years or so, called Seed. So I really hope going into 2015 we start transitioning back into the filmmaker aspect of my life. But when it all comes down to it, really, guys, I'm just a dude reading books, right? That's all I am. I'm not your teacher, although I may be teaching today. I'm just a dude reading books I have what I consider to be well-informed opinions, but that's all it is. That's all it is. It's my opinion. None of this is thus saith the Lord, although I will be posting scripture. But really, this is thus thinketh Rob as it pertains to these scriptures that we'll be going through out the weekend. And like I always say, you know, I am a dude just reading books. Some people would say I'm a crazy dude reading books, worthy of the tinfoil hat that I'm wearing there, and my lovely bride in support of me with her hat as well. But like I always say, look, don't believe a thing I say, all right? Don't believe me. Take notes if you want to listen. You know, I'm just sharing with you what my research has led me to believe. It doesn't mean it's true. You know, and quite frankly, as I continue to dig, I may change my views on some of these things. But what I'm going to be presenting to you today is simply my current understanding, where I am right now, what I believe these various subjects are, the conclusions these subjects are leading me to. So, but search these things out for yourself to see whether or not they be true. All right. Many of you have heard of the Bermuda Triangle, right? Yeah, I got the X-Files music going on here because a lot of weird and freaky, wild stuff goes on in the Bermuda Triangle, right? Well, I'm not going to talk to you about the Bermuda Triangle. I'm going to talk to you about the Yahuwah Triangle. And this is going to be an adventure, I think. Yeah, I got the music going on right there. Indiana Jones. You guys remember that when it first came out, right? Were you jacked out of your mind when you saw Raiders of the Lost Ark? I was. Because it was a fun adventure, right? And I'm hoping that this weekend, this seminar will be a fun adventure as we go through some things in the scriptures. Before I really get into the topic of this lecture, though, I want to address why the name Yahuwah. Well, it comes from what they call tetragrammaton, the Yod He Vav He. Of course, in the King James Bible, it's rendered as Jehovah. Some say, well, there's no J, so it should be Yehovah. And others say, well, there's no V either, so it should be Yahovah. Others say, no, it's Yahweh. And I have settled on Yahuwah. I was sort of a Yehovah guy for a while, and I understand Yahweh too. You know, I'm not. First of all, let me just tell you right up front, I am not a sacred namer. Okay, I'm not. I recognize that God has a name, and His name is not God, nor is it the Lord. It is Yod He Vav He. Now, as far as how it's pronounced, you know, people can debate it. And I think really whether you're saying Jehovah, Yehovah, Yahweh, Yahweh, or Yahuwah, everybody's doing the best they can with a bunch of consonants and filling in vowels. But I'll tell you why I landed on Yahuwah, and really Sheila landed on it before I did, is because of the names of the prophets. And you can go to a website, behindthename.com, and look up some of the prophets' names. There are a number of them that include the name of God in their name, such as Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu. See, the part, his name, actually Jeremiah or Yirmiyahu, means Yahuwah has uplifted, but it's pronounced Yahu, that portion of God's name that's incorporated into Jeremiah's name, Yirmiyahu. Same thing with Eliyahu, Elijah. My God is Yahuwah. The pronunciation is Yahu. And Yasha-Yahu, or Isaiah, Yahuwah is my salvation. So really, it was the incorporation of the name of God in the prophets and the way it is pronounced that caused me to land on the pronunciation of Yahuwah for Yod He Vav He. And it also just kind of works out cool because I had that little intro talking about the Bermuda Triangle, and the Yahuwah Triangle just sort of, well, it rhymes with it. Okay, I'm not that deep, right? I'm telling you, you know, this is just sort of my thought process as I'm going through this stuff. But regarding the name of God, this is early representation of some of the Hebrew, the early rendition of the Hebrew, sort of a pictograph language there. And you can go online and see like the Paleo Hebrew and the ancient Hebrew and stuff, and see different depictions for the letters of the alphabet, the Hebrew letters, and their corresponding meanings. You know, our letters don't mean anything. It's just A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? But the Hebrew letters actually have meaning. In fact, when I was taking Hebrew 101 twice, we learned that every word basically is based on like a 2 or 3 letter sheresh root word that they add prefix to, and you know, depending on whatever the root word is, you know, you can add prefix or suffix to it, but it'll still have the inherent meaning of the root as part of the word's meaning, but also it can contain the combined meanings of the letters that make up the word. And so we were taught that if every letter has up to 7 meanings, they say, then every Hebrew word must have 70 meanings. So it's a pretty deep language as you look into it. But what's really cool when you look at the name of God, thus spelled, Yod He Vav He, reading right to left as the Hebrews do, it's interesting. I'm going to show you something reading left to right now, what the meaning of those letters are. Of course, reading right to left in Hebrew would be hand, behold, nail, behold, excuse me. But reading in English left to right, it's behold the nail, behold the hand. That's rather interesting. That the name of our God actually talks about a hand with a nail in it. Like right from the beginning, when he first introduced himself to mankind, he was telegraphing something. He was telling us something, that there was going to be a hand with a nail in it. And even in the modern version of Hebrew, the way the letters are depicted today, you can put together interesting pictures like this. Yod He Vav He, sort of like the God-man right there. Anybody care to guess which hand we're talking about that has a nail in it? The left or the right hand? I'm sure you're probably thinking the right hand. Well, there's good reason to think that way, because you can see all through the scriptures a reference to God's right hand. Exodus 15:6, for instance. Your right hand, Yahuwah, has become glorious in power. Your right hand, Yahuwah, has dashed the enemy in pieces. Wow. Care to guess who or what is the right hand of the Father? Yeah, Yeshua, the Son. Same thing. You can take the Hebrew letters and form an interesting picture right there. And if you imagine that hand is palm facing you, it's the right hand. Yod, Shin, Vav, Ein in that case. And if you've heard some of my other teachings, you know that I've looked at the meaning of the letters of Yod, Shin, Vav, Ein and put together one of the possible meanings for the name Yeshua is the hand that destroys the establishment of the eye. And you'll see right here, I've got the all-seeing eye with a no-go sign over it right there. Yes, we have the victory in Yeshua, the right hand of the Father. We see in Isaiah 41:10, don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. So we are victorious through Yeshua, the right hand of Yahuwah. How cool is that? I just think that's like seriously awesome. All right, so that's a little bit of a background regarding the name of our presentation this weekend. Now let's get into the triangle itself. What am I talking about when I'm talking about the Yahuwah Triangle? The source material that I really kind of started out with is in Isaiah chapter 19. In that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord. And it shall be for a sign and for a witness unto the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. For they shall cry unto the Lord because of the oppressors, and he shall send them a Savior, and a great one, and he shall deliver them. And the Lord shall be known to Egypt, and the Egyptians shall know the Lord in that day, and shall do sacrifice and oblation. Yea, they shall vow a vow unto the Lord and perform it. And the Lord shall smite Egypt, he shall smite and heal it, and they shall return even to the Lord. And he shall be entreated of them, and shall heal them. In that day shall there be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria, And the Assyrian shall come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Assyria, and the Egyptians shall serve with the Assyrians. In that day shall Israel be the third with Egypt and with Assyria, even a blessing in the land, in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, Blessed be Egypt my people, and Assyria the work of my hands, and Israel mine inheritance. That's Isaiah 19:19 through 25. Well, you see right there the 3 points in what I refer to as the Yahuwah Triangle, right here. And I've got Giza, Jerusalem, and Babylon, although, as you'll see as we get further into this this weekend, that there might be a better location for the point in the land of Israel besides Jerusalem. But regardless, we've got Israel, Egypt, actually Egypt first, Israel second, and Babylon or Assyria third. Those are the 3 points in what I refer to as the Yahuwah Triangle. And I find it really interesting that they're all reconciled by verse 25 of Isaiah 19. So as I started to dig into this, started looking into it, I was thinking about this monument that's described in the beginning verses there, 19 and 20 of chapter 19, and began to wonder, is this talking about the Great Pyramid of Giza? And as I started to look into this for myself, I realized, well, I'm certainly not the first person who has had that thought. There are actually a lot of people who have thought along similar lines. Here's a little sort of a preview video, a promotional video for a series done by Ken Klein Productions.
Certainly, the Great Pyramid, even according to the great historian Josephus, was made with knowledge from the heavens. With its many inner passageways, chambers, and vaults, the complexity of the interior of the pyramid created design issues that were far too advanced and beyond the ability of architects of that day. Nevertheless, the prevailing view of the Great Pyramid is that it was built by the pharaoh Khufu, and it was built as his tomb. But in 820 AD, grave robbers broke through the numerous barriers guarding the secrets to the Great Pyramid, and finding neither riches nor remains of the pharaoh, inadvertently proved that it was not a tomb, but a repository of knowledge and information that was to endure for all of time, and to be interpreted at a later period far into the future. In the mid-20th century, aerial photographs were taken that proved that the Great Pyramid was actually curved at its base. This initial discovery, and many others that followed, led to a deeper inquiry into the mathematical, geological, astronomical, and meteorological disposition of the Great Pyramid. These investigations yielded incredible insights and proofs substantiating the view that only messengers from outside and beyond our knowledge of the physical realm had the capacity to design the Great Pyramid, and with it came to leave a prophecy hidden in stone.
That's an excerpt from the series The Great Pyramid, The Lost Legend of Enoch. I think there's 3 DVDs in that set, so you might want to look that up. Check it out by Ken Klein Productions. Pretty cool stuff. And as you look into the Great Pyramid, boy, it is one fascinating structure. This is a cutaway showing the inside, the interior of it, with the King's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, the Queen's Chamber, and an interesting location called the Bottomless Pit at the end of a descending passageway. And some air tunnels that look up towards various constellations and stars in the heavens. Really awesome. So let's look at a few facts regarding the Great Pyramid. First of all, I want to point out that we all probably are familiar with the fact that there were 7 wonders of the ancient world. The first one being the Great Pyramid. Then we had also the Colossus of Rhodes, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Temple of Artemis or Diana at Ephesus, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria. These are what was referred to as the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Now, the Great Pyramid of Giza was the first and is actually now the only remaining representative of these 7 wonders. It's been around for a long time. Some suggest that it was even built at some point around or during 2560 to 2540 BC, which according to my understanding places its construction before the flood of Noah, which was at about 2348 BC. It doesn't take much research at all to find a lot of very interesting facts concerning this marvelous ancient structure. The Great Pyramid is located at the center of the geographical landmass of the planet, meaning it is positioned exactly at the latitude and longitude lines that contain more land and less sea than any other place on Earth. So it's like ground zero on the landmass of the Earth. It is 750 feet high, long at each base, situated along the 4 cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. The ratio of its circumference to its original height is equal to the value of pi 3.14. The weight of the pyramid is said to give a reasonable estimate of the Earth's mass. At 481 feet tall, it was believed to have been the tallest man-made structure for nearly 4,000 years. Just to put that in perspective, this is a scale representation of the Great Pyramid compared to an airline jet, and the Statue of Liberty. It's just massively huge. Occupying more than 13 acres of land, it is made up of approximately 2.3 million stone blocks weighing from 2 to 30 tons or more each, held together by a mortar of known chemical composition, but which cannot currently be reproduced. And they figured out, okay, we know there's a mortar here, but we have no idea how this was made. It, along with the other pyramids on the Giza Plateau, are aligned to the Belt of Orion. A lot of people have pointed that out, showing the, because you see they're not exactly in a perfect line. The lower one is just slightly off-centered, and it mirrors the Belt of Orion. Pretty wild. And that kind of threw me, actually, for a little while, especially based on the conclusions that I came to regarding what the Great Pyramid represents. And why is it aligned to Orion? Because if you've seen my Mythology and the Coming Great Deception DVD, or read my book, Babylon Rising and the First Shall Be Last, you'll note that Orion was one of the names that Nimrod became known by. You know, he was, because of the Tower of Babel, people going away talking about the same guy now in different languages after the confusion of the tongues. He later became known, you know, in Scripture, he's the mighty hunter. Well, he became known as the mighty hunter, the constellation in the sky called Orion. And of course, if you look at various depictions of him throughout the ancient world, you got Baal on the left there in almost the same exact pose as Orion. You got Gilgamesh and Ninurta, you get these Sumerian gods right there. And this affiliation with this individual, Nimrod, with the lion over and over again. So I was, you know, it seemed like, okay, this represents Nimrod, who wants to take a club to the lion of the tribe of Judah's head. And so, you know, and I talked about the mighty hunter and that he may be the Assyrian being spoken about in Isaiah 10:5. Woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger, in whose hand is the club of my wrath. But then I had sort of a change of heart, or let's just say a better understanding of what's going on after I read The Witness of the Stars by E.W. Bullinger. And I would also say there's another one, Gospel in the Stars by Joseph Seiss. They give what they believe to be the original meanings of the constellations that the you know, pagans and the Babylonians and whatnot later stole and counterfeited and usurped and tried to apply to themselves. Looking through The Witness of the Stars, Bullinger points out the true mighty hunter, what Orion represents, because God's the one that put the Mazzaroth in place. You know, the Mazzaroth being the original version of what later become the counterfeit zodiac that astrology is based on. Orion, he says, is the light breaking forth in the person of the Redeemer. He is so pictured in the ancient Dendera zodiac, where we see a man coming forth pointing to the 3 bright stars, Rigel, Bellatrix, and Betelgeuse, as his. His name is given as Ha-Gat, which means this is he who triumphs. The hieroglyphic characters below read Or. Orion was anciently spelt Orion, I guess. I don't know how you say it. It sounds the same. From the Hebrew root, which means light. So that Orion means coming forth as light. The ancient Akkadian was Ana, the light of heaven. And Bullinger, he looked at the order of the constellations and how it's all laid out. And, you know, we have 4 seasons and whatnot. He figured 4 seasons and sort of 3 constellations per season. And he referred to them as star books. So the 4 books of the stars. And he says in Star Book 3, that's how he kind of organized and arranged his book. In Star Book 3, Chapter 1, Bullinger refers to this constellation as the mighty, triumphant, glorious prince. Noting that Orion is the most brilliant of all the constellations, Bullinger goes on to describe it, observing also that it is mentioned by name several times in the Bible. Then he really gets into an amazing tale. He says, thus beautifully is set forth the brilliancy and glory of that light which shall break forth when the moment comes for it to be said, arise, shine, for thy light is come. The picture presents us with the light of the world. His left foot is significantly placed upon the head of the enemy. He is girded with a glorious girdle, studded with 3 brilliant stars, and upon this girdle is hung a sharp sword. Its handle proves that this mighty prince is come forth in a new character. He is again proved to be the lamb that was slain, for the hilt of his sword is in the form of the head and body of a lamb. In his right hand he lifts on high his mighty club, while in his left he holds forth the token of his victory, the head and skin of the roaring lion. Because we also know, Yeshua is the lion of the tribe of Judah, right? But we also know that the devil goes about as what? A roaring lion, right? Seeking whom he may devour. So we ask and wonder, who is this? And the names of the stars give us the answer. And Bullinger goes on and gives the meanings of each of the names that comprise the constellation of Orion. And I give you a lot of this information in the blog. That it's on the show notes page there. It's the second one, I believe. The Great Pyramid 2.html, I think, is the URL. So if you want to read a lot more about what Bullinger has to say regarding the constellations and their biblical meanings, specifically as it pertains to this subject, you can check that out. Bullinger continues. He says, such is the cumulative testimony of Orion's stars, which day after day and night after night show forth this knowledge. That testimony was afterwards written in Yahuwah's Book of the Stars. The Prince of Glory, who was once wounded for the sins of his redeemed, is about to rise up and shine forth for their deliverance. Their redemption draweth nigh, for, quote, Isaiah 42:13 and 14, the Lord shall go forth as a mighty man. He shall stir up jealousy like a man of war. He shall cry, yea, roar. He shall prevail against his enemies. I have, he says, long time holden my peace. I have been still and refrained myself. Now will I cry like a travailing woman. I will destroy and devour at once. So that's Bullinger's take on the true meaning of the mighty hunter, that Nimrod, trying to be like God, apparently counterfeited and tried to assign meaning to himself. I always forget what this is called. It's not an acrostic. Anyway, I can't think of it, but there's a term for when you see this this layout in Scripture. And so you kind of see it the way A, B, C, D, and then D, C, B, A. It's all laid out like this. And looking at that scripture, Isaiah 60:1-3, arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light, and the kings to the brightness of thy rising. Note that in A and A, we have the rising of Israel. In B and B, the light that is come upon her. In C and C, the glory of the Lord. And in D and D, the darkness of the world. In this, or this is the glory of the Lord, which the heavens constantly declare, Psalm 19:1. They tell of that blessed time when the whole earth shall be filled with his glory, Numbers 14:21, Isaiah 11:9. When the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, Isaiah 45. As all see now the beauty of Orion's glory, but side by side with the glory which the coming light of the world shall bring for his people, there is that wicked whom the Lord shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. And that's concluding a quote from E.W. Bullinger, The Witness of the Stars, excerpts from book 3 of the Stars. So the counterfeit, when it comes to the counterfeit, I say fear not, because even though he may think he's going to get victory over the Lion of the tribe of Judah, we see in Revelation 5:5a, and one of the elders saith unto me, weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed. We definitely get the victory in the end. And Isaiah 14:25 says, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains tread him underfoot. Then shall his yoke depart from off them, and his burden depart from off their shoulders. The counterfeiter will be destroyed by the real deal. With the greatest of accuracy, getting back to the Great Pyramid, it is believed to have been oriented precisely to true north. Today, either due to pole shift and or continental shift, it is still only off by 3 minutes of a degree. The Great Pyramid is the only pyramid built with 4 sides that are concave, thus effectively giving it 8 different flat surfaces to the structure. The indent of the concave sides is very precise and equal, actually, to the curvature of the Earth's surface. So if you could take the curve of the Earth, it would perfectly match the concave aspect of the sides of the pyramid. I mean, that's just like crazy. This feature is only visible from the air during the spring and fall equinox, when the sun hits it at just the right angles during the hours of sunrise and sunset. And of course, being 8-sided, we know that 8 is the number of completion. The interior of the structure maintains the average temperature of the planet, roughly 70 degrees Fahrenheit. It is the only pyramid in Egypt containing both ascending and descending passageways. All the other ones have only descending. The coffer in the king's chamber is made from one solid block of granite. No one really knows exactly how it was cut and hollowed out to form this shape, but microscopic analysis reveals that it was made with a fixed point drill comprised of jewel bits, which would have required a drilling force of 2 tons to make the thing. Yeah. It also had to have been placed into the chamber during construction because it is too big to fit into the ascending passageway. It never contained a body. The coffer was empty upon discovery. Furthermore, it had no lid and no writing on any of its sides, which would be highly unusual if it were a coffin. Thus, while there is much speculation, no one really knows its true purpose. And I remember Kent Hovind coming through town and doing his creation series in my Baptist church up in Massachusetts. And I remember him making a comment, and I was going to try to include it here. And I saw it again. Sheila was watching a video with him, and he actually said it. I said, oh, I gotta grab that clip. I forgot to do it. But anyway, he says that the interior dimensions of the coffer in the king's chamber match the exterior dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant. I haven't confirmed that for myself, but if that's true, it's pretty interesting. Dead bodies have no need of air, yet in both the king and queen chambers, there are air shafts which extend to the outer surface of the pyramid. It has a swivel door entrance / exit weighing about 20 tons. It was so well balanced that it could be opened from the inside with minimal force. But when closed, it had such a perfect fit that it was barely detectable, and there was no way to grab hold of it to open it from the outside. The southern shaft in the king's chamber pointed to the star Al-Nitik, or Zeta Orionis, in the constellation of Orion, which for the Egyptians was associated with Osiris, who I believe is just the Egyptian rendition of Nimrod. Circa 25 2450 BC. If this calculation is correct and my timeline of the flood is correct, that would place this alignment to about 100 years before Noah's flood. The southern shaft in the Queen's Chamber pointed to the star Sirius, circa 2450 BC. Sirius was associated with the Egyptian goddess Isis. Now again, when we look at this stuff, remember, these are counterfeits. God has a real meaning for those constellations that are related to his purposes. And I believe that the King and Queen's Chambers are looking at the various constellations and stars that align with his purposes, not that of the counterfeit. And I explain that again in a lot more detail in that particular blog. So for more on that, you can see babylonrisingblog.com/Great Pyramid, capital G, capital P, Great Pyramid 2.html. So you can read all about that there. It's quite a bit there for you to check out. Although missing today, it is believed the capstone of the Great Pyramid may have been made or coated with pure gold. The ancient historian Diodorus Siculus, writing in 60 BC, revealed that even in his day, when the pyramid stood with its outer casing stones intact, the structure was complete and without the least decay, and yet it lacked its apex stone. So it wasn't even there during his time in 60 BC. Now this really caught my attention. This is what steered my view of the Great Pyramid in the direction we're going to talk about today. It was originally covered, and secular historians will tell you this, that they believe and calculated, and I guess have historical records or whatnot that lead them to believe that it was originally covered with 144,000 highly polished 15-ton encasing stones, which when reflecting the sunlight would have made it shimmer like a diamond, capable of being seen for many miles in every direction. Some have even gone so far as to suggest that if polished to a mirror-like finish, it could have been seen from the moon to look like a star sitting on Earth. In fact, the ancient Egyptians referred to the Great Pyramid as Ikhet, meaning the glorious light. I don't think it's a coincidence that specific number shows up, 144,000. It's kind of like, really? And of course, there are many, many more fascinating facts concerning the Great Pyramid and its measurements, and they literally tell the story of our planet and the solar system. There are far too many for me to list here. So for more information, I invite you, of course, to consider the resources listed in my blog. Needless to say, it is one of the most extraordinary structures on the planet. And many want to attribute it to this ancient king or that, this guy or that guy or whatever, but if it were indeed a memorial or a tomb to a earthly king, why all the precise measurements, angles, and structures meant to illustrate the cosmos and our place in it? There's got to be something going on there. So that leads to the question, all right, well, who built the Great Pyramid? Now, if you talk to an Egyptologist or a historian, they will tell you they believe that it was ancient Egyptian pharaoh named Khufu, the Greek rendition of it being Cheops. Supposedly Khufu is the one that had the Great Pyramid built. But you know what? The only proof, the only evidence that would even remotely suggest that, you know where that comes from? It comes from a little scribble of graffiti. And not only does it come from just a tiny little scribble of graffiti, but the location of where that little scribble of graffiti is extraordinary and suspect in many people's eyes, that it may have been sort of a scandalous conspiracy type thing where somebody actually, the discoverers, quote unquote, may have put it there. And you'll understand why it's suspect when I show you the location of it. Okay. Now, keep this in mind, all right? Like 9/11. 9/11, the only proof that we had that supposedly box cutter toting Muslim terrorists hijacked airplanes and slammed them into buildings was the recovery of the passports, of a passport. Not just any passport, but the passport of the alleged hijackers. Wow. You mean this plane hit, we're told that the intense heat from the burning jet fuel caused the steel to melt and and the building to fall at free fall speed and land in a pile of ash in its own basement because of jet fuel. And yet on top of the big pile of ash, the paper passport of the alleged terrorists survived. And the FBI said, okay, we know who did it. And we bought the story. There's a great clip with Alex Jones making fun of that whole thing, talking about, and this passport made of shards of Thor's hammer. Shards of Thor's hammer, because it apparently survived the intense jet fuel that melts buildings. Yeah, so that was the only proof that we had that 9/11 was caused by such individuals. Well, this is the only proof that we have that this pyramid is supposedly built by KHUFU. In an online interview with Mark Lehner, an archaeologist from the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago and Harvard's Semitic Museum, recorded for Nova, he said, quote, "One of the most compelling pieces of evidence we have is graffiti on ancient stone monuments in places that they didn't mean to be shown." Okay, just stop right there. Think about that for a second. Have you ever seen the temples and stuff in Egypt? They're like loaded with hieroglyphic imagery of whatever pharaoh the temple represents or the monument represents. And they detail like every little minute aspect of their life all over the place. This is the greatest stone monument on the entire planet. And you're saying that, the dedication to the guy who this is supposedly for is in a place not meant to be seen? I mean, that completely contradicts everything else you see everywhere in the land of Egypt. He continues, you come to a block of stone in the relieving chambers above the king's chamber. First of all, you see this cartouche of a king. Cartouche is what they call that symbol right there. And then some scrawls all in red paint after it. That's the gang name. There's one that's well attested in the relieving chambers above the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid. And apparently it says the Friends of Khufu Gang. End quote. That's Mark Leonard. Yeah, Mark Lehner, whatever. Okay, let me show you where that was found. Here's a cutaway looking at the inside of the Great Pyramid. And you see right here, this is the king's chamber. This area right above the king's chamber is not accessible to anybody, and that's what they call the relieving chambers. Here's a close-up drawing cutaway of it, and apparently that's to help relieve the pressure of all the stones, above it. So it's supporting structure. Well, that's not accessible. You can't get to it until these guys digging a passageway, through the stone, because they wanted to see, what might be around or above the king's chamber. They dug up around it. And when they dug up around and they got up in here, that's where it supposedly was found. Of course, nobody can really go up there to verify it. And, so how do we know that the guys who dug the hole didn't put that there? I mean, some people suggest that. Maybe they've tried to date it or something and they say, well, no, it's legitimate. It goes all the way back. I don't know. But at any rate, the greatest monument on the entire planet, the only inscription to anybody that you can find in it, is way up in these relieving chambers right here and right here, apparently, and maybe another one right here, I guess, that nobody was ever meant to see until these guys dug around the structural areas there and found it. So pardon my skepticism, but I don't think that proves anything, frankly. This is a quote from this website. You see the source right there, the link right there. They say, one of the few other written references to Khufu is contained in the Inventory Stele, stele, I don't know how you say that, stele, discovered at Giza in the 1850s. It commemorates the restoration by Khufu of a small temple near the pyramid and indicates that the Sphinx Temple, and possibly the Great Pyramid itself were already in existence in his day. The stele is written in a later style of writing, and whereas some Egyptologists regard it as a copy of a 4th dynasty original, others consider it to be an original Sate product. Either way, it contradicts the idea that the Sphinx was built by a Caffrey who ruled after Khufu. And as I understand it, you could go there today, and this inventory stele, steel, whatever you call it, is boarded up, so you can't read it anymore. But apparently it says that all he did was go there and do some restoration work on what was already there. Now, there's another researcher who I highly respect, and I really would have loved to have gotten to know better. He passed away a year or two ago by the name of Patrick Heron. I did interact with him a little bit on Facebook a few times, and found him to be a really nice guy. But his book, The Nephilim and the Pyramid of the Apocalypse, really had an impact on both Sheila and I when we read it. He has some really good stuff in that book, but I don't agree with all of his conclusions in there. I highly recommend you get the book. In fact, it's there on the home base page for this conference. If you scroll down to the bottom, you can see a bunch of books that you can check out related to what we're talking about here today. Now, as I say, I highly respect this guy. I recommend you read his book. I just simply don't agree with all of his conclusions in the book, specifically where he talks about, he says, the late Patrick Heron recognized the fact that the Great Pyramid is really the only thing that fits the description of Isaiah's monument and pillar. But in his book, he wrote that he believed it was built by Nephilim to honor Lucifer. This is where I differ with him. He says on page 210 of his book, some Christian scholars have suggested that the Great Pyramid was built by Job or by some other patriarch, and believe it is an altar designed by Yahweh himself, which contains prophetic information relating to what the future holds for Christian believers. He says, I cannot accept this to be the case, since all the information we require regarding our redemption and our future is provided in the pages between Genesis and Revelation. And well, let me play a little video. He felt that the Great Pyramid was built to honor Lucifer, and that only he had the kind of knowledge required to build such a structure. And I'll let him tell you some things in his own words, and we'll come back and talk about it.
While its location is startling enough, that is only the beginning of the wonders of this remarkable structure. It stands 42 stories high and covers an area the size of 10 football fields. It is an almost solid mass of limestone, weighing in excess of 14 billion pounds. Yet in 5,000 years, the Great Pyramid, situated on what appears to be a pile of sand, has settled less than 1/2 inch. Originally, its radiant structure, with its massive covering of highly polished limestone blocks, were fitted to tolerances of 1/2000 of an inch, so precise that a razor blade could not be inserted between the joints. It was optical precision on a scale of acres, and the Great Pyramid is still the most perfectly aligned structure on Earth, missing true north by only 3 arc minutes. And in spite of its massive size, it is only out of straight alignment on all 4 sides by approximately 1/4 of an inch. But the Great Pyramid is not only a structural wonder, it is a mathematical wonder as well. The esteemed architect Clarence Larkin came up with the following facts. Taking the Hebrew cubit at 25.025 inches, the length of each side of the Great Pyramid is 365.2422 cubits, which just happens to be the exact length of the solar year. What's more, the solution to the mathematical problem of how to square the circle is incorporated within the geometry of the Great Pyramid of Giza. For centuries, the Great Pyramid was the tallest building in the world, and it contains enough stone to build a 6-foot wall from New York to Los Angeles. There's even more to this amazing building, but for now, let's see if we can determine what the Great Pyramid has to do with Scripture and with end times. There is an obscure verse in the book of Isaiah which has baffled commentators for many years. Speaking of the last days, Isaiah says, "In that day there shall be an altar to the Lord in the middle of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord." So this verse is saying that the altar and pillar is both in the border and in the middle of Egypt at the same time. But how can this be? Interestingly, there is only one spot that fits the description of being in the middle of Egypt and at the border at the same time, and that is where the Great Pyramid of Giza now stands. The reference would seem to place the altar and the monument in different places, on the border and in the middle of the land. So how do we come to the conclusion that the Great Pyramid is the fulfillment of that prophecy? As it turns out, the Great Pyramid of Giza is the only monument that fits this qualification of being in the middle of the land of Egypt and at its border at the same time, but only if we have an understanding of ancient geography. The Great Pyramid, as we can see, lies at the apex of the triangle created by the Nile Delta. But in ancient times, Egypt was divided into two countries, Lower Egypt, or the Delta, and Upper Egypt. The Great Pyramid sits precisely on this border. Yet this is also the centre of the land of Egypt, when the two ancient countries are viewed as one. Isaiah's enigmatic prophecy regarding an altar and a pillar refers specifically to the end times. Its location is fixed, and since the billions of pounds of limestone that makes up the Great Pyramid are not likely to be moved anytime soon, we are left with the conclusion that the Great Pyramid of Giza just might possibly be the altar and pillar Isaiah was referring to. But why? Who would build it for such a purpose? Archaeologists, geologists, mathematicians and scientists of all kinds have probed and measured and studied the Great Pyramid in great detail, but they've yet to come up with the simple answer as to what is its purpose. Even though Egyptologists maintain that the Great Pyramid was nothing more than a burial tomb for the pharaoh Khufu, the fact of the matter is, no mummy, no body of any kind has ever been found in any pyramid. The so-called sarcophagus that was found in the king's chamber, for instance. There's no lid for the sarcophagus, and there's no way of getting one into the king's chamber or out again. So there is no possible way this could have been used as a burial tomb. The sarcophagus is, however, a perfect representation of a golden rectangle, a mathematical theorem not discovered until thousands of years after the pyramid was built. And the grand gallery leading up to the king's chamber does show evidence of being an ancient observatory, focusing on a particular part of the heavens. And once again, the construction of this massive gallery is accomplished with computer precision. In addition, there are 4 star shafts, 2 in the north face and 2 in the south, each pointing to 4 specific stars: Orion, Sirius, Beta Ursa Minor and Draco. But why? What would a dead king want with portals to the stars? Ancient Egypt preserved complex beliefs concerning the creation of the world in the little-known Edfu building texts carved into the walls of the Edfu temple in Upper Egypt. These hieroglyphics speak of the builder gods, who set out the plans and foundations for all the future pyramids and temples. I think we should take another, more literal look at these hieroglyphics. Certainly they portray giants who are clearly in charge of whatever activity is going on. Could it be that these giants are none other than the offspring of the Nephilim, the fallen angels of Genesis 6, which were thrust down to earth with Lucifer? The scripture describes them as men of great renown as well as giants. Only they had the knowledge, skill and power to create an edifice that would serve as a replica of the heavenly Jerusalem from which they had just been evicted, with its gleaming polished limestone surface and gold capstone.
All right, so you see that he's making a correlation there of the Great Pyramid to the New Jerusalem, the city coming down from heaven. But he says only they had the knowledge necessary to build this. Only the fallen angels could have done it. And I have to disagree. He says, on page 210, he says, furthermore, a star shaft leading from the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid is associated with Draco. We have already concluded that Draco is a dragon, who is the devil and Satan, the ancient serpent of Revelation 12:9. Also, 2 of the other star shafts have been identified with Osiris, Orion, and Isis, Sirius, 2 of the main deities of ancient Egypt. All these clues would indicate that the architect of the monument was scribbling his identity all over the design in the same way that people like to see their own names appear in lights. And the name which echoes from this building is that of Draco. It is his name and those of his associates, which are writ large in the blueprint of the pyramid and in the light of the stars it points to. And I have to say, like I said, I wish I had gotten to know this man better. I mean, his book, it really did profoundly impact us. And while I agree with much of what he had to say, I don't believe the Great Pyramid was built to honor Draco, the dragon, who is Lucifer. I believe there's another way to look at it. And judging by his opinion regarding Sirius, Isis, and Osiris, I don't know that he read any of the works by Joseph Seiss or E.W. Bullinger, because if he had read those books, I think he would have come to a different conclusion, because it really looks more like the Orion being Yeshua, the coming warrior, coming to destroy, coming from the south, and of course, the further south you go, you end up with the Southern Cross. So you come up from the Southern Cross to the appearing of the mighty heavenly warrior that is Yeshua, looking toward the dragon who has set himself up on the sides of the north, and it's on the north side that Draco is, with the intent of destroying him. So I think there's another way, and bringing him low. There's another way you can look at it. Now, he says, because it is the future, because it is the nature of Lucifer to imitate Yahweh, he decided to construct a magnificent edifice for himself on this earth. This building was to be a monument to his own ego. This is Patrick Heron on page 209. So, by way of his minions, the Nephilim, and the awesome spiritual power at his disposal, he designed and constructed this massive pyramid at Giza, using all his celestial powers and astronomical knowledge to align it with the various stars and constellations. In Ezekiel 28, it is said of Satan, "Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty," Ezekiel 28:12. Thou sealest up the sum means you are the finished pattern. Only an exalted celestial being, or beings with such knowledge of the stars, could have accomplished such things. Their original abode was among the celestial bodies in the city of God, and they were present at the laying of the foundations of the earth. Patrick Heron, Nephilim and the Pyramid of the Apocalypse, page 209. But I ask, were Lucifer and his angels the only ones that could have had this knowledge? I don't know. I mean, certainly they could have. I don't dispute that, but I don't think they're the only ones. I think there might be a better candidate. And many of you have heard me refer to what I call the synchronized, biblically endorsed extra biblical texts, those being Enoch, Joshua, and Jubilees, which we've put together in a book called Genesis and the Synchronized, Biblically Endorsed Extra Biblical Texts. And I call them that because they do sync up. They tell the same story in the same chronological order of events that we find in the book of Genesis. Of course, they're biblically endorsed because the Bible, the canonized text, does quote from these books, refers to things that can only be found in these books, it mentions them by name under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So I think that's a pretty good endorsement. Of course, extra biblical because they're not currently found within the covers of our Bible. But I put them together all in one volume with Genesis, both in the King James and in the Septuagint, side by side as a parallel Bible, with a rather lengthy introduction, but all of it together for you to check out. And in the book, when you look through these books, I think you find some extraordinary things. For instance, we see in 1 Enoch 82:1, it says, "And now, my son Methuselah, all these things I am recounting to thee and writing down for thee, and I have revealed to thee everything and given thee books concerning all these. So preserve, my son Methuselah, the books from thy father's hand, and see that thou deliver them to the generations of the world." Let's continue. He says, "Yea, I, Enoch, will declare them unto you, my sons, according to that which appeared to me in the heavenly vision, in which I have known through the word of the holy angels, and have learnt from the heavenly tablets." And Enoch began to recount from the books. This is 1 Enoch 93:1-3. We also see in 1 Enoch 103:1, "I know a mystery and have read the heavenly tablets and have seen the holy books." So if we consider what's written in the book of Enoch, right? The year before he was raptured, he was commanded by Yahuwah to literally teach his son Methuselah what he had learned in heaven. Now, prior to that, if you read the Enochian account, he was more or less hired as the defense attorney by the Watchers. They wanted to have him plead their case before Yahuwah after they mated with women and sinned and all that. And Yahuwah, for whatever reason, went along with that plan. and basically said, when Enoch presented their petition for forgiveness, he said, okay, Enoch, this is what you're going to tell them. No, I do not forgive you. No, you will never have peace. And, here's the terrible judgment that awaits you. So he spent time apparently in heaven judging the watchers. And the year before, we read in the canonized text that Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him. Before he was raptured, he came back from his time in heaven there with a whole lot of books. Some say 365 books. And that he came back and taught all that he knew to his son Methuselah. Then we see Patrick Heron believe that only Lucifer, of course, he thinks that only Lucifer had this knowledge, but if the book of Enoch is to be believed, we see that Enoch was the first to decipher the story which was hidden by Yahuwah in the stars, and then he was to write it all down and tell it to his son, requiring that these things be preserved for future generations. We know even from the canonized biblical text that Enoch had a close relationship with Yahuwah, right? So I don't think it's unreasonable to believe that Enoch could have learned all that he needed to know to be able to design something like the Great Pyramid. But did Enoch build it? Well, let's consider what Josephus had to say about this stuff. Josephus wrote, he's talking about Adam and his sons, and specifically Seth and the offsprings of Seth. And he's talking about those generations. He says, they also were the inventors of that peculiar sort of wisdom which is concerned with the heavenly bodies and their order, and that their inventions might not be lost before they were sufficiently known. Upon Adam's prediction that the world was to be destroyed at one time by the force of fire and another time by the violence and quantity of water, they made two pillars, the one of brick and the other of stone. They inscribed their discoveries on them both, that in case the pillar of brick should be destroyed by the flood, the pillar of stone might remain, and exhibit these discoveries to mankind, and also inform them that there was another pillar of brick erected by them. Now this remains in the land of Syriad, or Egypt, to this day. Well, the only thing that fits that description is the Great Pyramid of Giza. And I've speculated, and I've seen others that follow a similar line of thinking, that perhaps what was inside the coffer was the original 365 books of Enoch that maybe that were stolen. Speculation, of course, but when you take this into account, what Josephus is saying, that it was the sons of Seth that built this thing, that starts giving us some clues. So let's look at the timeline here. This is a pre-flood timeline chart that I did a number of years ago, showing when I believe the Genesis 6 experiment took place, where Genesis 6, 1-4 talks about angels mating with women. That happened in 3550 BC. Enoch tells you that the first generation Nephilim, that Josephus refers to as the Titans of Greek mythology, would only live for 500 years, and in that time they would kill each other off. And so if you go forward 500 years, you see first, getting close to that time, 3114 BC, the Mayan calendar, the Aztec calendar stone shows up. Then we have the death of Adam. Shortly after the death of Adam, we have the first generation Nephilim, the end of their clash of the Titans. They're all killed off by that point. And then there's a period of time, almost 50 years or so, that Enoch, between the death of the first generation Nephilim, he then is doing his thing in heaven and judging watchers and all that, and the watchers are judged, bound, and buried. And then he comes back to earth and he talks to his son, tells him everything he learned up there, and then he's raptured. So since Enoch was raptured a year after he taught men all that he learned from the heavenly tablets and the holy books, I don't believe that he's the one that did it. Now, if Josephus's account is accurate, we see that the house of Seth was involved in the building of two pillars. And I think we don't need to think of pillar as in like a pole, because often we see that word is interchangeable for monument. Therefore, I believe Enoch was given the building instructions. I think he was sort of the architect, if you will, or if Yahuwah was the architect, he was the one who was the drafter, drew up the blueprints for it, so to speak, the plans. But it's my opinion that it was likely his son Methuselah who led, possibly with the help of Seth and others in the family, the building campaign. And probably even could have been done by forcing Nephilim to actually do the construction. to Patrick Heron's point, he believes the Nephilim built it. Well, I don't have any problem believing that the Nephilim may have been the ones that were the grunt labor. If the construction dates of 2560 to 2540 BC, like the Egyptologists and all those guys talk about it, if that date is accurate, then this project took place during a very interesting time within the days of Noah, leading up to another building project, namely, of course, the Ark, which would commence about 200 years later. So this idea of Nephilim building stuff for the righteous is not foreign, actually. A few years ago, when I was doing research on Solomon's temple, I was like, why do the Freemasons love this guy? And I understand that Solomon went off the deep end for a while, for a long while. I mean, he got involved with some really bad stuff, and there's all kinds of legends and stuff regarding him and the 72 goetic demons and his ability to control demons and conjure and do all kinds of stuff like that. But when I was looking at First Kings, I realized, wait a minute. If you look at the construction of the temple, well, let's just sort of back up. I've got the title here, Who Built Solomon's Temple? Well, Nephilim did. and I'm like, well, okay, what made this thing holy? Because the occult loved Solomon's temple. So I'm like, why did they love this temple so much? Well, because they built it. Now, before you think I'm crazy, let's look at some things. The only thing, first of all, that made the temple holy was God heard Solomon's prayer. Solomon's prayer of dedication was beautiful, and he hadn't gone off the deep end at this point yet. He was still walking in the ways of his father David and following Yahuwah, and he gives this beautiful prayer of dedication, right? And then we see in 1 Kings 9, the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your petition. I have set this temple apart to be holy, this place you have built where my name will be honored forever. I will always watch over it, for it is dear to my heart. As for you, if you will follow me with integrity and godliness, as David your father did, obeying all my commands, decrees, and regulations, then I will establish the throne of your dynasty over Israel forever. For I have made this promise to your father David. One of your descendants will always sit on the throne of Israel. But if you or your descendants abandon me and disobey the commands and decrees I have given you, and if you serve and worship other gods, then I will uproot Israel from this land that I have given them. I will reject this temple that I have made holy to honor my name. I will make Israel an object of mockery and ridicule among the nations. The only thing that made that temple even remotely godly was God's decree that he will put his name on the thing and bless it conditionally upon obedience. He said, as long as you walk in my ways, I'll keep my name on this thing, and that's what made it set apart and holy. But if you don't, I'm going to pull my name off of this thing, and it's not going to be good. Nephilim built it. In 1 Kings chapter 7, we see that Solomon had hired Hiram of Tyre. Now, that's an area known for Baal worship, to build the temple of God. But you have to note that Hiram had just built the temple of Zeus, of Jupiter, in Lebanon before he did that. Now, and as Solomon got up and running with this whole endeavor, we see in 1 Kings 10:14 that 666 talents of gold was brought in for him. It's like, yeah, all these numbers are kind of weird. These things always made me curious. Chapter 8 goes on to describe the completion of the temple and Solomon's beautiful prayer of dedication. And then the next chapter reveals God's acceptance, but it came with a warning. But to the point of who built it, notice what it says right here, 1 Kings 9:20 through 21. There were still some people living in the land who were not Israelites, including, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Those are the same ites that you see all through the Torah and the book of Joshua, where Yahuwah is repeatedly telling Israelites, kill them all, utterly destroy them, kill the women, kill the children, kill the animals, kill everything. These are all the ites of Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 through 20. These are Nephilim tribes. Amorites, tall as cedar trees, Amos 2:9. Okay, it says there's still some of these guys still around, of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These were descendants of the nations whom the people of Israel had not completely destroyed. So Solomon conscripted them for his labor force, and they serve in the labor force to this day. Nephilim built the temple. So I'm like, okay, it's clear from the passage I read before that it was Yahuwah who made the temple of Solomon holy, but that appears to be in spite of how it was built and by whom. People like Hiram of Tyre, a Zeus worshiper. The same chapter goes on to say that it took 20 years to build a temple and Solomon's royal palace, and it was built by forced labor, but who was the one who built it? We see here Nephilim tribes. So this clearly shows that Solomon had Nephilim and demons build the temple of Yahuwah and his own personal palace through forced labor. If the very house of Yahuwah could be built by Nephilim, why could not the mirror of the New Jerusalem also be built by Nephilim? That's really an insult to them. If as enemies of the state, so to speak, they're being forced by the godly to build a temple for a god they don't believe in. So it's in a way it's sort of a punishment for these guys to make them force labor to build a temple to a god that they don't believe in. But if they're also giants, it makes it easy to move around 20-ton blocks of stone. If we're talking about the Great Pyramid, right? Is it not an insult to have a forced labor building something for your enemy? Does this not happen time and time again in history? The conquered are forced frequently into slavery in order to do things for the victors. So I really have no issue with Patrick Heron's conclusion that the Great Pyramid may have been built by the Nephilim. In fact, considering the size and weight of the stone, I think, like I said, it just makes sense. And notice that it says, these were the descendants of the nations whom the people had not destroyed. Again, those were Nephilim nations. We see, for instance, those same names show up in Deuteronomy 20, verse 17. But thou shalt utterly destroy them, namely the Hivites and the Amorites, the Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites. Same names as God has commanded. And that shows up over and over and over again. All right, so why then was the Great Pyramid built at Giza? Now, I believe it could have been built by the forced labor of Nephilim, moving these big stones around under the initial blueprints drawn up by Enoch, overseen probably by Methuselah and the house of Seth. So that's who I believe built it. But why did they build it at Giza? Why this specific location? And again, guys, look, this is speculation. I'm doing a lot of speculating here, and I acknowledge that. So you can take it or leave it. I'm not telling you thus saith the Lord. This is just what I'm thinking. So you can do your own research and come to whatever conclusions you may come to. But I'll continue to build my case here. Isaiah 19, we looked at earlier, says, in that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord. And it shall be for a sign and for a witness unto the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. For they shall cry unto the Lord because of the oppressors, and he shall send them a Savior and a great one, and he shall deliver them. Now, there are a lot of interesting Bible commentaries linking this to being fulfilled in the days of Onias, or of something yet to happen in the future. Josephus said that the children of Seth built something out of stone specifically to survive the flood, right? So again, it's just speculation on my part, but I believe it was built to house all the books written by Enoch, and it may have had other functions as well. Let's explore this text some more as we continue to look at it, where it says, at that time, this is in the ISV, the previous one's in the King James. The International Standard Version says, at that time there will be an altar to the Lord of the heavenly armies in the heart of the land of Egypt, and a monument to the Lord at his border. That's where I talk about how pillar doesn't necessarily mean pole, like we would think pillar. Other translations render it differently, like in this case, monument. And in the Jubilee 1000, it actually renders it as pyramid, an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pyramid titled to the Lord at the border thereof. The word in question here is matsaba, Strong's number 4676. Strong's identifies it as simply a pillar, but Brown Driver's Briggs goes a little deeper, defining it as a pillar, as a monument, personal memorial, a stone set up and anointed as memorial of divine appearance, especially if sacred stones or pillars in connection with an altar erected. The word used consistently across all the English translations as altar is misbach or misbeak, or I don't know how you pronounce that. Strong's number 4196. It's a word used for the place of reverence and worship to deity. Webster defines it as 1, a usually raised structure or place on which sacrifices are offered or incense is burned in worship, often used figuratively to describe a thing given great or undue precedence or value, especially at the cost of something else. 2, something which serves as a center of worship or ritual. That's a definition for altar. And we see in Isaiah 19, it tells us that this particular monument shall be for a sign and for a witness unto the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. So in Isaiah 19:19, we have something set up essentially to commemorate an altar, a location of worship, established by Yahuwah. Consider for a moment the meaning of the word commemorate. 1, to exist or be done in order to remind people of an important event or person from the past. 2, to do something special in order to remember and honor an important event or person from the past. Now, yes, the word commemorate is something I'm using. It's not in the text itself, but the text says it is a sign and a witness, right? Or a testimony. But I see it as the same. I think, in short, the purpose of the monument is to be a witnessing reminder, if you will, of Yahuwah concerning a specific place of worship, a marker in the land of Egypt. Not just anywhere in Egypt, though. It is at the center and border of Egypt. Well, the Great Pyramid monument fits this description. It was located in the place where the northern fertile delta area came with the southern desert region in the middle. It met with that area, thus forming a border. And Patrick Heron's talked about that as well as others. Here's a depiction of that, showing how it was thus divided. And here's another link right there, a source for this quote. Since the full official name of the pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Giza, means in English the Great Pyramid of the Border, the answer to the apparently contradictory definition of Isaiah is found in the Great Pyramid. The only spot on the face of the earth that completely answers this description both geometrically and geographically is the precise place where the Great Pyramid actually stands. But why here? Well, consider the purpose of man. A.W. Tozer wrote in his book, The Pursuit of God, in chapter 3, he said, God formed us for himself. The Shorter Catechism, agreed upon by the Reverend Assembly of Divines at Westminster, as the old New England Primer has it, asks the ancient questions, what and why, and answers them in one short sentence, hardly matched by any uninspired work. The question is, what is the chief end of man? Answer, man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. With this decree, the 24 elders who fall on their faces to worship him that liveth forever and ever, saying, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. God formed us for his pleasure, and so formed us that we, as well as he, can in divine communion enjoy the sweet and mysterious mingling of kindred personalities. He meant us to see him and live with him and draw our life from his smile. Now remember, Isaiah says that there is an altar there in Egypt, right? An altar, as Webster defines it, is something which serves as a center of worship or ritual. As noted earlier, the Great Pyramid is the center of geographical landmass of the planet. If the question, or the answer, I should say, to the question proposed here by the Westminster Shorter Catechism is correct, and I believe it is, then Yahuwah apparently created a being in his own image, right? As Genesis said, his own image and likeness for the sole purpose of worship and fellowship with him in unity and mutual love. Thus, I began to wonder if Adam was created at this location. Could this be the spot where Adam was literally pulled from the dust of the earth, at the literal center of the world, which in turn was to, Adam was to worship and glorify Yahuwah. So surely that center of worship, so to speak, would be a logical location for Yahuwah to form man. And if this thesis is correct, consider also the shape of the Egyptian Nile Delta area. Now, without getting too crude or anything, just kind of looking at this, and I don't believe in the whole concept of Mother Earth, but you hear people talk about Mother Earth all the time. And if this is the center of the Earth, then this sort of kind of looks like the female anatomy right there, with Giza being at the birth canal, right below area of water, right? So, again, if we were to think of Earth as mother, like so many cultures do, then this location, being at her center, has the appearance of the pubic area, with the Giza Plateau being located at the birth canal. Interestingly enough, While I have never read anything or heard anyone else's, I've never heard anybody suggesting that Giza was a place of Adam's creation. I did, however, find that the ancients believed this to be the spot where creation started. And there's a book right here by Graham Hancock called Heaven's Mirror, Quest for the Lost Civilization. And he says on page 66, we are told that this lost domain, the homeland of the primeval ones, was an island which in part was covered with reeds and stood in darkness in the midst of the primeval water. We are told that the creation of the world began on this island, and that it was here that the earliest mansions of the gods were founded. At a certain point during the primeval age, however, this blessed former world was overwhelmed suddenly and totally by a great flood. The majority of its divine inhabitants were drowned, and the mansions of the gods were inundated. And he goes on to say on page 67, the Edfu tradition, we heard Patrick Heron talking about the Edfu text. He said the Edfu tradition, and so perhaps the tradition of many other temples, evidently looked at this far distant temple as the work of the gods themselves, in which the creation of the earth was completed. So there appears, Hancock never comes right out and says this, but this is a place where they believe creation got started. And I just asked a question, could it be where this is the spot where Adam was pulled from the dust of the earth? Hancock mentions the beliefs of other people groups around the world. They associated their sacred temple sites and pyramids as the navel of the world, or the place from which creation began. So it seems ingrained into the global collective memory of ancient civilizations. There appears to be an intimate connection between the pyramid structure and creation itself. So again, I ask, could Giza be where our Heavenly Father formed the first man? And if it is, it also may be the center of the region known as Eden. A lot of people think of the garden as Eden, but it says the garden was placed eastward within Eden. So it's a place inside of Eden. Now, Egypt could then be a very special place if this is the center of the region. And this is just an idea that I came up with back in 2009. I was staring at the map and I was looking at Isaiah 19, and I basically was thinking, okay, Giza, and I put like a compass needle point right there in the Giza, and I extended the pen out to just west of Babylon, and then I drew a circle. And the reason I did that is because I believe Babylon, and we'll talk about this in the later sessions, was the place of exile from the garden. So it's outside of the circle. And it's just a theory. I just drew the circle, But when I did that, of course, Giza being at the center of the world, it may have been the center of the region known as Eden, within which we find the Yahuwah Triangle. And the first point of this location is the Great Pyramid, possibly the starting point of mankind. Now, the Isaiah 19 altar. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And the Lord formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Well, right from the beginning, all right, here possibly on the Giza Plateau, we have the beginning of humankind created to be in fellowship with Yahuwah at the literal center of the earth. Could this, in fact, also be an altar in another sense, that of sacrifice? Consider this, Revelation 13:8. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. So in other words, the plan of God, from the moment he pulled Adam up out of the dirt, he knew that the Lamb was going to be slain for him right away. When we consider the idea that Yahuwah may have known right there from the beginning that he would have to sacrifice his only begotten son, the second Adam, in a way, I would have to say that this is an altar. From the moment Adam was created from the dust of the ground, the plan for future redemption was already set in motion. Now, we often think of the word foundation, right, as in the beginning, but could it also be the bedrock of the world? The Greek word used for foundation is kataboli, Strong's number 2602, defined as A, foundation, B, depositing, sowing, technically used of the act of conception. Well, check this out. Revelation 11:8 says, and their dead bodies, talking about the two witnesses, shall lie in the street of the great city, which, now this is Jerusalem, where these two guys are killed. But it says, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So they're tying the sacrifice of Yeshua to Egypt, even though we're talking about Jerusalem right there. If indeed the Great Pyramid is located where I believe it is for this reason, then it certainly serves as a matzaba monument, especially of sacred stones or pillars in connection with an altar erected as a memorial to an amazing event, the creation of man. Considering the above definitions of this word, I do not think it is at all unreasonable then to suggest that the second Adam was literally planned to be slain from the very moment of the first Adam's conception or depositing in from the dust of Egypt's foundational bedrock. Indeed, the book of Revelation also makes a connection right here between the lamb sacrifice and Egypt. Now, commenting on this, I was talking with Steve Mutria of 119 Ministries, and he was fascinated by this whole thing too. And he said, you know, both Sodom and Egypt had an exodus take place on Passover. Because I was like, why is Jerusalem likened unto Sodom and Egypt? What's the connection? You know, clearly these guys are killed in the streets of Jerusalem, but why are they saying, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt? And Steve pointed out, he said, well, both Sodom and Egypt had an exodus take place on Passover. Egypt, he says, was obviously the one with Moses and the 10 plagues, but many missed that the day Lot and his family left Sodom and Gomorrah was also Passover. And he covers this in one of their end of days teachings. We know that Lot gave the two angels unleavened bread. This was not a common practice. Unleavened bread was normally only made for Passover, especially when giving it to guests. And you know, he and others have made note of the fact that the feast of God didn't just all of a sudden become invented after the Exodus with Moses. We see events taking place on feast days prior to the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. There have always been the appointed times of Yahuwah. But Steve says, but the reason why Jerusalem is referred to as this is because it will be the next place where there will be another Exodus taking place on yet another Passover, as this will be when the Antichrist begins his rule. This is in harmony with Yeshua telling all in that area to flee when they see the abomination of desolation, which I believe will be at the midpoint of the tribulation period. So that was a conversation I had with Steve Matria, and I agree with him. So it's just something to consider, an interesting insight, possibly a correlation between Jerusalem, Sodom, and Egypt, and while they're all likened unto each other here in Revelation 11:8. As I started looking at other interesting correlations regarding this idea of Adam possibly being created at the Giza Plateau or in Egypt, I saw some things in the book of Hosea. We see in Hosea 6:7, but like Adam, you broke my covenant and betrayed my trust. Okay, that's talking about Adam breaking, the command, don't do this, and he went and did it. And then Hosea 8:12-14. Even though I gave them all my laws, they act as if those laws don't apply to them. That sounds familiar. Sounds like most of Christianity today. The people love to offer sacrifices to me, feasting on the meat, but I do not accept their sacrifices. I will hold my people accountable for their sins, and I will punish them. He's talking about Israel, the northern tribes here. They will return to Egypt. Why are they having to return? You know, the Syrians caused them to be dispersed into all the world, right? But we see here that God's saying, I'm going to cause them to return to Egypt. Why? Verse 14, because Israel has forgotten its maker. So again, here we see a connection between Adam creation and Egypt. And keep in mind, breaking his law gets us kicked out of the garden. Keeping them brings us back into it. Consider also the last days implications of that. Now, is the Great Pyramid a model of the New Jerusalem? A growing number of scholars are beginning to come to the conclusion that the New Jerusalem is in fact a pyramid and not a cube. I was a cube guy myself for many years, sort of like the Borg cube, looking at the description, you can certainly look at the description and imagine that it is a cube. But the late Patrick Heron was one of the first that I had read that proposed that it could be a pyramid. But it was Doug Hamp really that changed my mind. Doug convinced me to ditch the cube in favor of the pyramid. And after I'd written my blogs, and even after I put together, I've originally did this presentation we're doing right now in Sukkot, during Sukkot a couple months ago. After I came back from Sukkot, well, actually just a couple weeks ago, I was looking for some more material on the subject, and I saw this book right here by Noah Hutchings, the book The Great Pyramid, Prophecy in Stone, and I just recently bought it. It just came in the mail. And open it up, and in the introduction, Noah Hutchins writes, among those who have proposed that the Great Pyramid was related to a divine purpose are Josephus, John Graves, Sir Isaac Newton, John Taylor, Astronomer Royal C. Piazza Smythe, Dr. J. A. Seiss, J. Ralston Skinner, David Davidson, and James and Adam Rutherford. Some of the preceding have used the Great Pyramid as a base to peddle their own particular brand of theology. However, others like Dr. Seiss have been serious students of the Bible and great men of God. And Hutchins, he goes on to write in chapter 5, let me grab my book here, pages 62 through 64. I'm going to read something he wrote here. He's talking about Seiss and Clarence Larkin also. He says on page 62, this heavenly blueprint is beautifully illustrated in the design of the Great Pyramid, and many outstanding Bible scholars like Clarence Larkin and Dr. J. A. Seiss have described it as a Bible in stone. Quoting Larkin, he writes, the Great Pyramid is the only form of building that conforms to the symbolic description of the spiritual building spoken of in Scripture, of which Christ is said to be the chief cornerstone, Ephesians 2:20 through 22, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together groweth unto a holy temple in the Lord, in whom ye also are builded together for an habitation of God through the Spirit. There is no chief cornerstone in architectural construction, but in a building of pyramid form and in shape, it is exactly like the building it tops it out. To its angles, all the buildings fitly framed together. Being five-sided, there is no place for it in the building until the finishing touch is given, and therefore the builders rejected it until needed. We read of Christ, quote, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, end quote. The capstone of a pyramid, until needed, would be in the way, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to the workman. So with Christ, Paul says, we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Gentiles foolishness, a rock of offense, 1 Corinthians 1:23. The capstone of a pyramid is five-sided and five-pointed, with sharp points always sticking up. Anyone falling on it would be broken or injured, and when on its way to its lofty position, were to fall on anyone, it would grind him to powder. For what has been said, we see that the Great Pyramid is symbolic of the spiritual building of which Christ is the chief cornerstone. And then Hutchinson goes on to say, it would also be well for us to consider the opinion of Dr. J. A. Seiss, the dean of modern premillennial scholars concerning the Great Pyramid. And he quotes Seiss here. He says, quote, Egypt was a hotbed of idolatry from the beginning. Its people began by the worship of heroes and heavenly bodies and ended in the worship of bulls, cats, crocodiles, hawks, and beetles. Their false religion was in full sway when Cheops was born. Lepsius tells us that the whole land was full of temples filled with statues of gods and kings, and their walls within and without covered in colored reliefs and hieroglyphics in celebration of the virtues of their hero gods and their divine, ever faultless children. Nothing, even down to the palette of a painter, the style with which a lady tinted her eyelashes, or a walking stick, was deemed too insignificant to be inscribed with the name of the owner and a votive of dedication of the object to some patron deity. And yet, here is the Great Pyramid, the largest, finest, and most wonderful edifice in all of Egypt, situated in the midst of an endless round of tombs, temples, and monuments, all uniformly loaded down with these idolatrous emblems and inscriptions, And in all its long avenues, grand gallery, and exquisite chambers, in any department of place whatsoever, there has never been found one ancient inscription or slightest sign of Egypt's idolatry. In the center of the intensest impurity, the Great Pyramid stands without spot, blemish, or remotest hint or taint of the surrounding flood of abominations, like the incarnate Son of God, sinless in a world of sinners, end quote. And let's see, he says something else here that caught my attention that I found interesting. In chapter 12, pages 130 and 132, he says, "We know that certain things in heaven were revealed in type to Moses, and other heavenly scenes were revealed in the same way to Ezekiel, Daniel, and other prophets. But before Moses, there was Abraham, the federal head of the Hebrew race and the father in faith of all who believe on Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And we know from the Bible that God also revealed something to him. It was so wonderful and so marvelous that he left his shepherd kingdom and set across the wilderness in order to get just a glimpse of it. We read in Hebrews 11, 8 through 10, quote, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, and in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God." End quote. Hutchings says, it is not mere speculation to conclude that God showed Abraham a figure of the New Jerusalem in the same manner that he revealed to Moses an outline of the temple in heaven through the blueprint of the tabernacle that he gave the children of Israel. It is agreed by architects and archaeologists who have studied the Great Pyramid that it has the most solid foundation to be found in any structure on earth. After more than 4,000 years, in spite of its immense weight, it has not settled so much as a fraction of an inch. Interesting observations in this book right here. Is kind of cool. And getting it right after I had already done all this, I took a lot of this that he had to say as confirmation. Now, regarding the idea of the Great Pyramid being a model for the New Jerusalem, Patrick Heron does a really good job of explaining it here.
In chapter 21 of the book of Revelation, John describes a future city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven to earth. John describes this future city, the New Jerusalem, in great detail. Its brilliance was like a precious jewel, and the angel measured it with a golden rod. We are told of all the various stones it's made out of. We are told it has 12 gates made out of a single pearl each, and that the river of life flows out from the midst of it, etc. And at the end of this detailed description, John gives us the dimensions of this future city, and he says its length and its breadth and its height are the same. In today's measurements, that would be 1,500 miles long, 1,500 miles high, and 1,500 miles wide. This measurement has led many scholars to believe that the New Jerusalem is a cube, but there is one other geometric model that fits the criteria, and this is a pyramid. There is no question that the Great Pyramid is a truly unique and remarkable, some would say miraculous structure, certainly worthy of being an altar and pillar to the Lord. Taking all the evidence into account, it seems clear that the Great Pyramid of Giza is an earthly representation of the future New Jerusalem, the heavenly city which is to come down out of heaven from God. So when Isaiah spoke about an altar and pillar, he was referring to the Great Pyramid of Giza. And it's this Great Pyramid of Giza which is pointing forward into the future at this future pyramid city as described in great detail in chapter 21 of the book of Revelation. And this future New Jerusalem is pointing back at the Great Pyramid of Giza. There is a direct connection between the two.
And indeed, he's not the only one who believes this. There's a number of people that talk about it and make the correlations, and the dimensions work out. They work out either way for a cube or a pyramid, but the pyramid idea is starting to make a whole lot more sense. And you know what? I guess Patrick probably knows better than any of us now. He's gone on to be with the Lord. So, the rest of us have to just speculate. But If you do a Google search on it, you can find quite a lot of authors writing about this. And as I was looking into the facts concerning the Great Pyramid, and one of its measurements, which really caught my attention, concerns the ratio of the Great Pyramid as compared to the northern hemisphere of our planet. When the and I don't know where they get this number exactly, but when the pyramid's height is multiplied by 43,200, the resulting dimensions of the New Jerusalem as compared with the radius of the moon ends up being this. So, like, if you scaled the Great Pyramid up such that its base would ride right across the equator, its ends touching the ends of the Earth, as you see in this picture here, what's left over sticking out over the top happens to be equal to the radius of the moon. I mean, that's like pretty bizarre. We see in these comparisons a perfect match. I mean, I don't think this is just a coincidence. I think, well, look, I like the way this artist right here rendered it. This is maybe, I don't know, maybe the way the New Jerusalem might look when it's sitting on the Earth. Who knows? But those are the dimensions. If it's 1,500 miles, that's what it would look like. And it's just bizarre. I mean, look at this. I mean, let's go back and look at that again. What are the chances that if you scaled it up, that's what you end up with? A perfect fit. When you consider the idea that Yahuwah likens our relationship to him as that of a marriage, think about it. If he's the king, what do we call the bride of a king? A queen, right? Is it just a coincidence that the inside of the Great Pyramid has a king's chamber and a queen's chamber and a pit that drops down from the entrance of the Grand Gallery? It's as if we are given a picture of the choice we have to make before entering the presence of the king. It's like you enter going down. I mean, all of us are destined, we're sinners from birth, right? Original entrance, you're going down. But then there you have a decision to make. You come to a point where you can make a decision. You choose right, you go up. You choose wrong, you go down. That's depicted right there, right? Pretty wild. It's like if we choose to if we choose marriage, then we're granted access to both the Grand Gallery and the King and Queen's chamber. If we reject the proposal, we go down to the pit. Now, when I enlarge this, the same way as that picture I showed you a minute ago, with such as the base is across the equator and the ends touching the Earth, when I did the same thing, showing this cutout right here, this is what I ended up with. Pretty wild, huh? I mean, look at where the pit ends up. If you believe as I do, I mean, that Hades is inside the Earth, that Hades is in the Earth, down below us, it aligns with what would probably be about the bottom of the core of the Earth. Now, while not exact, we must acknowledge that both numbers are rough estimates. So as no one knows exactly counted how many stones right there. I mean, we're talking about 2.3 million stones. Israel is the bride of the Lamb, the New Jerusalem, defined in the 21st chapter of Revelation as the bride, is most likely, as we're coming to see, the shape of a pyramid. But considering it is estimated that the number of stones making up the Great Pyramid is about 2.3 million, is it just a coincidence that the estimated number of the Israelites who left Egypt at the time of the Exodus was about 2.5 million? If you hear people talk about the Exodus, they say, about 2.5 million. Again, everybody's estimating. No one's actually counted every stone, and nobody was there to count every Israelite man, woman, and child during the Exodus. Still, I mean, is it not interesting that even while guessing, the number of cut-out stones in the temple may be equal to the number of, quote, living stones who left the home of the pyramid, the land of Egypt? I don't know. A lot of coincidences going on here, and I personally don't believe in coincidences. So, and then this was something else, that another interesting quote unquote coincidence. Again, I drew this circle, just, pure speculation. I put a compass needle in the center of Giza, drew it out to just west of Babylon, because I figured Babylon was outside of Eden. Drew a circle and figured, well, I think that might be the dimensions of what was originally Eden. Well, then when I took the dimensions of the square base of the New Jerusalem, 1,500 miles, to scale, and I put it on top of the circle, it was also a pretty darn close perfect fit. I don't know. Maybe it's all just a coincidence. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. The Yahuwah Triangle Part 1, a Great Pyramid. Lots to think about. And of course, I go into a lot more detail in the blogs. So again, if you go to the Babylon Rising blog links there, greatpyramid.html, you can read a whole lot more about what I was talking about here for the last 2 hours. And coming up next, we're going to talk about the Yahuwah Triangle Part 2, Finding the Garden of Eden. And we got a few minutes left, but I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to end this here and pop back up. Hello, hello, hello. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Anyway, I'm going to give my voice a break and go to lunch. So everybody go to lunch or get lunch if you're just sitting at home or whatever. Grab something to eat. And we'll see you back at 1 p.m. Central, just about an hour and 10 minutes from now for Part 2. All right, we'll see you then.